So we're going to discuss the chapter requirements. Folks, if you don't have your phone on mute, I would just ask that you do that at this time. I am getting some background noise. Thank you. But before we go into detail, I'd like to introduce to you Ken Hansen. He is the Chapter Rebate Review Task Force Chair, as well as our Chair-elect. Ken, again, was the chair for this particular task force and really helped to develop these requirements and the vision of the task force and what they wanted to do for our chapters in terms of rebates. I'm going to turn things over to Ken for just a moment. He's going to give us a little bit more background about how we came to these recommendations. Ken?
Okay. Well, Janice Hemel, the current chair of the ANFP board, brought this to the board and asked me to chair the task force to do that because we hadn't looked at the chapter rebates for many years. And so I had headquarters get a lot of historical data for us, and then we asked for volunteers from both large and small chapters, as well as really strong chapters and chapters who struggle. And so we came together over a day and a half to brainstorm and come up with what we hope is a good plan. That involved increasing the rebates, and that was what Janice Hemel's initial thought was, is that they hadn't been increased for several years, so we did want to look at that as an increase. And then, but we also wanted some additional accountability from the chapters as well. So I may just jump in as Abigail's going through the PowerPoint. If people have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks, Abigail.
Great. Thanks so much, Ken. All right. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump right in. So today our objectives, as you see here, we're going to be able to identify the new rebate requirements and the deadlines that correspond with those. We'll be going over the tools that are available for these new requirements to make it as easy as possible for our chapters to achieve those. We want to be sure that you understand the adversity rebate, the requirements of that rebate, and how to apply for it. And then, of course, go over the payout structure. So the first of the new requirements will be that each chapter is going to need to establish a finance committee. Now, the chapter board of directors, they are responsible for the implementation and the maintaining of a sound financial condition, and as well as protecting the chapter's financial interest. But the finance committee, they're responsible for overseeing all of the financial activities of the chapter, so like reviewing the annual budget, reviewing your bank statements monthly, and the finance committee, they're responsible, so they answer to the board of directors as the oversight of such activities that are related to any chapter finances. That's really what the purpose of your finance committee is. Now, before you determine who will serve on your finance committee, you're going to want to develop a charge as well as the responsibilities, just as the ones that you see here on your screen if you're logged in. This was taken directly from the National Finance and Audit Committee. You can certainly use this as a start and edit it as you need it. You might want to add additional members. You might want to change the criteria. Depending on what works best for your chapter, you may even want a longer term for these particular committee members. Currently, the National Finance and Audit Committee, their term is only 1 year. And I know of many of our chapters, their terms are often 2 years. So something to think about, but this is a great place to start. And whatever your chapter chooses to implement for this particular committee, we want to be sure that this is all added to our policies and procedures. Now, I know we just went through the last round of requirements back in January, and part of that was policies and procedures. So we'll be expecting to see this as part of your policies and procedures next year. And then in addition to this, out on ANFP Connect under Volunteer Resources, I do have a template for a finance committee composition. So it has a lot of this wording that you have here, the charge and the responsibilities. and the criteria, but again, you'll want to alter that to best fit your chapter. But it's a great document to keep on file and a document that you can submit to national once you have your committee formed. And so once you've determined the charges and the responsibilities, you'll need to work on the composition of members, and that will need to consist at least of 2 board members. This is at a minimum, so at least 2 board members and 2 non-board members. And the board members, it doesn't necessarily matter who it is. Ideally, you may want to have your treasurer chair this committee, but that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And then 2 non-board members. Now, this could really be used as a stepping stone for some of your newer members or your new volunteers, rather, that they might get an overview of, how finance works within a chapter. So it's a great volunteer opportunity. And, it might be something for somebody who's not ready to fully commit to those other leadership roles. This is a great thing for them to be a part of. I do want to point out, though, typically with our National Finance and Audit Committee, we do have our president-elect appoint these members. So, again, this is something you as a board will need to discuss amongst yourself as to how you want these members appointed. And whatever way you choose to do it, if you have the chair-elect or the president-elect appointing this committee, be sure to add that in your policies and procedures. And just to kind of give you a little bit more background about this, the purpose of the Finance Committee, again, is to oversee the finances of the chapter. It's really going to allow for more transparency of your chapter finances, especially for your members, and it's also going to provide another layer of protection when it comes to fraud. So the task force and I felt that this was a really important step for our chapters to start doing this. It's a great best practice for our individual chapters, but for our organization as a whole. Excuse me. And then once you've established the committee, you'll next want to determine a meeting schedule. National recommends that the committee meet at least quarterly, just to review the finances, review the bank statements, see where you are with the budget, though the treasurer should be handling these kinds of tasks monthly. Meeting as a committee to discuss them, to see where you might need to make adjustments or changes. And I understand that, meeting face-to-face, it can be difficult for some of our chapters, but a lot of this can be done over the phone. You might want to designate one person on the committee or perhaps the treasurer to send all the paperwork that needs to be reviewed, to send that to everybody ahead of time. And then everybody is able to follow along via conference call. So hopefully not too much out of your time, but again, this is a best practice and really looking to protect our chapter's finances and allow for the most transparency. So the next steps when it comes to creating your finance committee, again, you're going to want to start with creating those charges and those responsibilities. Again, feel free to use the template that we have out there in ANFP Connect. It's just a start point. And then once you've finalized those, as well as how the committee will be selected, be sure to include those and update your policies and procedures. That's very important that we have that documented. And again, whoever appoints the members, be sure we include that as well. And establish a regular meeting schedule, just as we said. Maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's every other month. Whatever it is, be sure that it's regular. This is, going to help you make sure that nothing falls through the cracks, that there are no errors when it comes to the management of funds. Just a very good best practice to be meeting regularly and discussing finances. And then, of course, you'll need to report to your chapter board as requested. Hopefully, our committees within our chapters are reporting regularly, but more specifically, the Finance Committee should be reporting what's going on from board meeting to board meeting. This particular requirement, this new requirement, will be due July 15th, so not too far away. So something to start thinking about, especially your president-elect, if they're going to be the one appointing the members. They'll need to start thinking about who they want to serve on that committee. Are there any questions about the Finance Committee at this time? No? It's pretty straightforward, and many of our chapters that already have committees, it's going to be just the same as you would forming any other committee. And then, of course, charging them with overseeing the finances and making sure they're on top of all of that. Okay, let's move on. Next, we've asked that one chapter leader from each chapter attend at least one chapter leadership development session each fiscal year. So these sessions can include chapter best practices at the regional meetings or at ACE. They may also include chapter leadership courses that we've recently introduced in the marketplace. And we're planning on introducing additional leadership courses, so the ones that are out there will not be the only ones available, but those are to come further down the line. And we've implemented this change as we'd like to see our leaders to continue to develop their skills personally and professionally, expand their knowledge when it comes to volunteers as well as the chapter operations and how it all works. It's also going to help our volunteers really understand their role as well as the best practices that we need to be doing that are all related to the chapter operations. And this is also a great way to expose our new leaders, the new leadership, additional training that they might need to be successful in their role. And again, the president's roles and responsibilities, the treasurer's roles and responsibilities, those online courses that are out there, we will be adding on to those and introducing new leadership courses. So those of us that are more seasoned, our veteran leaders, they'll have an opportunity to learn something new. So our next steps, well, first, as a board, you'll need to determine who from the board. Again, it only has to be one member, but if you wanted to do more, that would be fine. But you'll need to decide who will be the one to meet this requirement. And then, of course, what course do they plan to take? Are they going to be attending ACE? Are they going to be attending a regional meeting? And if so, are they going to be attending the chapter best practices session? And depending on what they need, what your board decides, you might need to carve out some time. You might need to budget for those kind of expenses to fulfill this requirement. This particular requirement will be due September 15th each year. Now, for those sessions, if you attended a chapter leader session and a regional meeting earlier this year, and I do actually have a list of everybody that attended those sessions from New Jersey and Minnesota, we can go ahead and count those. So if you had a chapter leader from your particular chapter, check in with them, check in with all of your chapter leaders to see if anybody had attended either the chapter best practices session in Minnesota or New Jersey, and we can certainly count that as the fulfillment for that particular requirement. So any questions on that one? Pretty straightforward. Again, this is just to help our leaders develop their own leadership skills and make sure that they're fully prepared to take on their roles and be as successful as they can within their chapter leadership. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep going. The next requirement is for each chapter to create their own succession plan. Now, ideally, each chapter would have their incoming officers determined or appointed the year prior to taking office. However, we know this is not always realistic with our chapters. We know we don't always have the volunteers, but we do want to see our chapters take a more proactive approach when it comes to cultivating the new leaders that do step up. So for this next step, you and your board will need to create a plan or an outline as to how to engage your new volunteers, groom them for leadership, and train them once they've committed to the position. So first of all, you're going to ask to get all of your members engaged. And I know all of you are, trying your darndest to do this, and I know some of it is successful and some of it's not. But I think if you take what we learned here today and explain this to your chapter and the importance of having people step up and take the lead and take on these leadership roles, that it should resonate with them and how important it is. So start by asking all your members to pitch in. Ask them to volunteer at least once a year. It doesn't have to be a role that takes up hours at a time or, is even a full-term commitment. Ask them to step up at the annual meetings and help pass out agendas or help with the registration. Ask them to start food drives if that's something your chapter is doing. Many of them don't understand the direct impact they can make just by helping out and lending a hand. And again, it gets them engaged. Additionally, we might want to remind them that they're welcome and even encouraged to attend your board or your business meetings. This is a really great way to get our members exposed to the operations side of our chapters, and will hopefully give them a better understanding of board governance. A lot of times we may fear things that we don't understand, and some of that reluctance to take on these leadership roles may come from them not really understanding how board governance works. So giving them the opportunity to come to a board meeting and see it in action can really make a big difference, and hopefully get them engaged and excited about that. Next, as a board, you're going to want to understand your chapter needs. And I think I've said this before, so I apologize if I sound like a broken record. One of the best ways to do this is to survey your members. We want to ask what they need. You know, this is something your board should really be considering doing each year. You want to, of course, you want to ensure that you're providing the right services. Maybe it's the education. You know, improve upon areas that we still find challenging. This survey gives us an insight into what our members are asking for and what they need from our chapter. And it's really going to help you better understand. Oh, sorry, I think somebody's dialing there. Having that survey and that data available is really going to help you better understand what your chapter needs from you. Additionally, you may want to sit down and conduct a board self-evaluation. You, as a board, will determine what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and how this is going to play in your succession planning. So you're understanding the needs of your chapter members want, and you're understanding the needs and the challenges of your board, because I know many of us have 2-year terms with our boards, so it's well worth that time. You'll also want to outline a plan to develop your leaders. So maybe you'll offer an annual orientation. I hope as chapters we're doing this as a best practice. Maybe you offer them the opportunity to shadow current officers. Ask current officers to create a best practices or tips sheet that they might be able to pass along to those new officers. Regardless of how or what you do, we want to be sure our new officers are given the correct training and information in order to succeed. So this can really make or break a chapter board if they're given the right training or not. Also consider work from the bottom up. Give those new volunteers, give them jobs of increasing responsibility. So, you know, start with something small. Perhaps the next time they volunteer, it's something a little bit more challenging. That way they're building that knowledge and they're building that confidence as a volunteer. When we develop that knowledge for volunteer, you know, they're more likely to stay engaged no matter how big or how small the role is. They're more likely to stay engaged. They're more likely to step up again and again when continually asked to do so or volunteer themselves. And we want to be sure that we point out that, you know, no matter what they're doing, it's impacting the overall, the bigger goal, the bigger picture. A lot of times we may not understand that as volunteers is how, you know, the hour of our time that we took to help out, how that really helps the overall goal of our chapter. And of course, a major part of succession planning is recruiting new volunteers. Your board will need to create a plan to continually recruit volunteers. This is a continuous process, and you might want to just start with sending out a call for volunteers each year if you're not already doing that. I know many of our chapters are doing that. And if you get any responses back, anything at all, you know, try to find a place for them. And you might even want to create a call for volunteers that's very general, not necessarily positions. However, if you have open positions, include those. But maybe just asking the general question if they'd like to volunteer for another role that is not within the survey. That way, you know, if they do say, yes, I'd like to volunteer, but I have limited time, you can have a small job that they might be useful for. And again, this is going to help them stay engaged and hopefully gain the confidence to move up the ladder and take more responsibility with each new position. You could ask them what they'd like to volunteer for. Maybe they only want to write one article in the newsletter. At least that's something. You know, and we don't want to just ask this once a year even. You know, if we come face-to-face with members, perhaps we're asking them continually as board members. This is really our responsibility to recruit those new volunteers. You just never know when somebody might have a change of heart, or maybe their schedule has changed and that's going to allow them more time to volunteer that they hadn't been able to previously. And last, once you get your volunteers in place, you just want to be sure to check in with them regularly, even if it's a one-time job. be sure that they had their questions answered. Ask them how it went. Ask them if they'd be willing to come back and try something different. Make sure that they feel confident in the role that they did, or if they don't, find a way to correct that. If you want to continually check in with them or ask for feedback, that's less likely that they'll disengage, or projects won't fall through the cracks then also for checking in with them. So those are a few steps you can use to begin your leadership succession outline. Are there any questions? Okay, so just a few next steps in that particular requirement. Again, I would strongly consider that some of our boards that share with the longer terms, they consider using a board self-assessment tool. Those are available widely through the internet. You might want to try nonprofit councils websites. They have a lot of great nonprofit tools out there. But again, take the time to review your needs as a board as well. And then when you start your outline, we do have a succession planning outline that asks questions for yourself and for your board as well as your members. And that's out there on ANFP Connect, but it's a great way just to get the conversation going about succession planning. And we also have a how-to, so that really goes over the steps that we just talked about. And both of those are available on ANFP Connect in the volunteer resources. And they're just a great starting point for those of us that haven't done leadership succession planning before. They're a great place to start. And of course, the outline is due to National January 15th. So you've got some time to do that. But again, succession planning is really a continual process, and it needs to be going on all year. So no time to start like the present. Are there any questions there about succession planning? No? And always feel free to call me or email me with any questions you might have, either after the program or next week if you think of something. Anytime. Please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm happy to answer those questions.
I have a question about Connect.
Yeah.
When I go to there, and like say, for example, I'm looking for the volunteer handbook,
Okay.
when I click on that, it doesn't necessarily take me there. It often takes me back to the same page where I started. Can you give us some idea as to how to do that?
Sure. So that might be that you need to actually, if you haven't signed in prior to that, on the member page, on the ANFP page, you do need to sign in. So that would be, if you're on ANFP Connect, on the right-hand corner, there's a sign-in button. Typically, it should remember your ANFP sign-in information, your login information. So if you just click sign in, then all of those links should appear. And depending on how you have your computer or your system set up, once you click on the volunteer handbook, it should automatically download.
It doesn't.
Okay. Do you want to give me a call after the program and I can help walk you through that?
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Hey, this is Omar. I wanted to jump in about recruitment of new members, new board members. And one of the things we did was we started new committees as a way of recruitment for leadership positions, thinking that people that have never served in leadership positions, if we just get them engaged in something, whether it be a hospitality committee or a program committee, anything, so they get a taste of that it's easy to serve, it makes it a little bit easier down the road to get people in leadership positions. Just a thought. So the more committees you have, the more engagement you have, which in turn cultivates leaders.
Yes, thank you, Omar. Agreed. And like Omar's saying, these are, a little bit less demanding jobs, if you will. So a hospitality committee, these are more ad hoc committees. They may not be needed every year, but if that's a great way to get your volunteers is start small. Start them on something easy and fun, and they're more likely to stay engaged and recommit maybe further down the line. Thank you.
And I'd like to say something. This is Sean Williams with Kansas. Segueing off of what Omar just said, when it comes to what we started last year, any new officers that came in, we are doing a journal, a step-by-step of what we've had to participate in, what we've had to follow up on, in far as it's like staying engaged with our position itself. And that way when a new person is interested, or you can talk about, you're not just walking in blindly with just here's your kit. We're actually giving you a personal journal of our path that we've had to take, the steps we've had to take for our responsibilities. And there's that question that's down in the chat about what is best advice to help members in following through with commitments. That's another way to kind of let them know, look, this is not, with your job descriptions and so on and so forth, here's what I've done. It's not as hard as you think it is, but it's more engaging than you can imagine. So a journal is what we've started doing. Like me personally, I just came in last year as a district. So I think that would be a good way to help future people.
Yes, thank you, Sean. I agree. Leaving that knowledge, is invaluable. Somebody that's already had that experience and can, say, this is what I've done, just like Sean's saying, and this is how it worked best, or this is maybe how it didn't work, but this is what I would suggest you do in the future. Especially if you're not always able to connect via email or telephone or have that opportunity to be mentored by a veteran officer, at least you have something then, something to go off of. And let's just address this question we have here on chat, how you keep them engaged through their commitments. It looks like somebody responded to that. Checking in with them, see how they're doing, make sure that they're doing okay. Sometimes people are, hesitant to ask for help. So when we ask them directly if there's anything they need, perhaps then is when they'll respond, letting us know if there is something they need. So I feel like checking in regularly with them, giving them the good training, letting them know that they're supported is oftentimes how they'll stay committed through their leadership role or their volunteer role, depending on what that is. And for those of you that are not on the web portion, Ken replied via chat. I'm going to go ahead and read that. His response was, I recommend checking in with them regularly as a gentle reminder, as well as keeping their commitment in their mind so they don't put it off into the last minute. So wonderful advice from our own chapter leaders themselves. Any other questions about the succession plan or anything else? And we're having some great discussion here, which I, always believe that we can learn from each other rather than, constantly hearing ANFP staff telling you what to do. You guys are the boots on the ground. You're in the trenches, so you are the experts. I would highly, recommend that you use our forum, our chapter leaders forum, and exchange this information and ask those questions to one another because, again, you guys are the experts when it comes to this stuff. All right, anything else before I move on? Okay, so the last new rebate requirement are the ACE award nominations. Each chapter will be required to submit one ACE award nomination, and it can be any of the 10 awards that we have available out there. This process is simple for the most part. Depending on if you're nominating yourself, it's going to take about 15, 20 minutes or so to complete one submission. Or if you're nominating somebody else and the criteria that's required, this may take a good number of hours. So as a board, you're going to need to plan accordingly. Who are you going to nominate, what award you're going to nominate them for, and who's going to be the one to submit that, because we do require at least a 250-word response for those nominations. Now, currently, we only have the nomination process open for about 8 weeks or so, but we don't know if this process is going to be changing. It is something we're going to be discussing with our Awards and Recognition Committee, so we'll send more information if that becomes available. Again, look for that in the future. So the reason behind this is that we thought this was a great way to support our awards program. Should your nominee be chosen, this is going to help bring more recognition to the credential, as well as recognition to your own chapter, and then, of course, the deserving individual. So many of our CDMs are underappreciated and unrecognized. So we think this is a great way for them to be recognized, regardless of they win the award. Our awards committee gets to know many of our members this way. Who are the superstars in our industry? Maybe these are people that we start tapping for leadership roles or speaking at ACE or regional events. So really a lot of exposure to the person that you're going to nominate. And again, currently these are due March 31st, so you have a little bit of time on there, but continue to look for some more information on ACE award nominations. Any questions on that? And I know some of you are familiar with that and have gone through the process this year, so some of this may not be new to anyone. Any questions there? Oh, what are the 10 awards? Wow, okay, so she put me on the spot there. I can name a handful of them. I should be able to name more of them, honestly. We have the CDM Spotlight Award, the Ambassador Award, the Partnership Award. We have the Horizon and the Innovation Award, Legacy Award. We have 2 Public Policy Awards. I know I'm missing a couple. Dining Distinction and Distinguished Service. Those are the 10 awards. The criteria and what they're all about and who they honor are actually on our website. If you go to our website and look for the CDM recognition under About ANFP, you'll find that on a web page. Any other questions? No? Okay. Let's move on to the adversity rebate. The adversity rebate is available to all chapters. We do strongly encourage our smaller chapters to take advantage of this if they think that's necessary, just because they are receiving that smaller biannual rebate and they may need more financial support when it comes to meetings or things of that nature. But again, this is open to all of our chapters. And this really is to help, excuse me, to help offset ANFP chapter operational costs related to meetings or programs or maybe some other initiatives. It's not meant to support scholarships, grants, or travel to ANFP meetings or any other personal expenses. So for example, when you might apply for this is if you had a speaker in mind for your annual meeting, but maybe you needed a little bit of help to get them there, so their travel expenses. This would be a great time to apply the adversity rebate. Maybe you needed some larger event space. Again, this would be a great time to apply for the adversity rebate for your chapter. So if you do choose to apply for the adversity rebate, you're going to need to complete the application. You're going to be asked what you intend to use the money for along with the timeline of the project. And again, the more detail you can supply with the application, the more the chapter leadership team will be able to better understand the project or the purpose which the funds will be used for. In addition to the program or project description, there are a number of other requirements the chapter will need to meet in order to be eligible for this rebate. The chapter had to have met all of the rebate requirements for the current ANFP fiscal year. So those are the new ones we just went over, the State Achievement Award, filing the 990, all of those requirements had to have been met in order for them to be eligible for this. They have to have an active tax exempt status with the IRS. Sometimes this falls through the cracks, so we want to be sure that all of our chapters are remaining on top of this. And again, the funds, we don't want them to support the travel to ANFP meetings or personal expenses. You know, that can muddy the waters a little bit there. Chapters must have the accurate financial account information with ANFP. They must have that on file. A lot of times accounts change hands, they close, they change banks for whatever reason. We just want to be sure we have that information on file for rebate purposes. And the chapter, of course, must submit a proposed budget of the project, program, or the initiative. Any additional funds for the rebate that you are granted, they need to be spent within 30 days of the disbursement. So this is something you really want to keep in mind if you do decide to apply for the adversity rebate. And we did this, and I'll go over the reasoning in just a moment. Let's go through the rest of the requirements. We also require a follow-up report along with receipts, and this must be completed after the project end date and returned to ANFP within 30 days. So after the project is ended, you have 30 days to send us the report along with the receipts. So these are the additional requirements for the adversity rebate in order for your chapter to be eligible to apply. So once your chapter has completed the application, they'll submit this to National, and then the chapter leadership team, they are responsible for reviewing the applications that come through, and they are ultimately the final decision makers. Now, there's not a cap per se, but there are a limited number of funds available that we budget for each year. So it's going to be sort of a first-come, first-served basis. But again, the CLT is going to determine if the requested amount is actually appropriate based on the project description. And depending on the funds that you need, you're going to want to determine when you need to apply for that application. And that here are the deadlines. So if you needed to receive the funds by June 30th, you're going to need to submit the application by June 1st. So you see here that we've actually required the submission of applications the first day of each quarter of our fiscal year. The funds are going to be dispersed by the second month of the quarter, and then they need to be spent by the last day of the quarter. And we did this so you as chapters, as long as you're following this fiscal year, and we as the national organization can have a clean slate every quarter when we close out quarter financials. I think we're getting a few questions here on chat, but are there any other questions on the phone? I do have one. How do we verify national has? So in terms of the adversity rebate, we track all of any submissions that come through, so whether they're for the rebates themselves, the biannual rebate, whether they're for awards, we track all of this information internally. So if you were to apply for the adversity rebate, we would confirm that you have met all of the other chapter standards or rebate requirements before you would be eligible for this adversity rebate. I hope that's the question you were asking. And like Ken said, yes, you can certainly call us. We can verify all of that. Again, we do all of that record keeping here. Any other questions about the adversity rebate? Okay, so something to think about. You're ahead. You know, some of you may already have your budgets completed. I know a lot of you do. But if you're thinking there's, you could use a little bit of extra financial support for something that you weren't able to budget for, this is a great opportunity. We really hope our chapters take advantage of this. This is another way that the task force really wanted to support all of our chapters in helping them make their meetings or their programs or their projects successful. All right, and last, of course, we'll just go a quick review of the payout structure. Not much has changed, but you'll see some substantial changes, and of course the increased amounts. Very pleased to see that the chapter task force was very adamant about this, so you have them to thank for that. We also reduced the range of members per tier, so this will allow for chapters to reach new member brackets a little bit more easily and therefore increasing their rebate amount. So good news there all around. Any questions about the payout structure? And it will work the same way that it has in the past. It'll be the biannual payout, so once in July, once in January. That first rebate, we do deduct $135 for bonding and liability insurance, just as we have in the past. Okay. Yes. For those of you that didn't see Ken's comments, yep. So Ken's answering some questions here. Thank you so much, Ken. Somebody asked, a caller asked, have we ever submitted our financial status to national? Most chapters do submit their budgets, and they should be publishing their treasurer's report in the newsletter for their membership. Absolutely. We hope each and every one of our chapters is doing that. As chapter members, that is their right to know the current financial status of the chapter. It doesn't have to go to national. I know at one point budgets were submitted to national. That is not something that we're tracking currently. But certainly if you send it to me, and I think some people still do just out of habit, I look it over. I'm happy to see what our chapters are doing, because I don't know what every single one of our chapters is doing at every single moment. The more information you provide me, the more I know that's going on. So you're welcome to send them to me if you'd like. How about that? All right. And now we have a full checklist available for all of these. With so many changes, I want to be sure that, you know, everybody can stay organized and they're staying on track and nothing falls through the cracks. So that is going to be available on ANFP Connect, as you see here. Under Volunteer Resources, you go to Chapter Management, and there's a new section titled Chapter Rebates. The first link is Chapter Rebates Requirements and Standards Checklist. If you click on that, again, mine is automatically downloaded. Yours may be different. It might drop into a downloads folder on your computer. But here you go, here you have all of our requirements. So again, your fall meeting dates, your 990 is filed and you've submitted the e-receipt to National, your affiliate agreement. All of this is on here. It includes the due date. It includes how you should be submitting it. And for your own purposes, you may wish to include the date that it was completed. We also have some optional things here if you're going to do awards. Again, those are due March 31st. They need to be submitted through the chapter portal. And then these are not required, but they are included as part of our chapter minimum standards. You know, and they're really on there because they're best practices. They are something that your chapter should be doing, reviewing and revising your annual goals, obviously creating an annual budget. Here we have the distribute call for volunteers. As we discussed earlier, this is really a best practice that each of our chapters should be doing annually. Just want to note a couple of things here. Policies and procedures and chapter bylaws, those were never able to be uploaded into the chapter portal, and now they are. Many of you, well, actually all of you had been emailing us because that was the only option, but now you have the option to upload them in the chapter portal if you wish. So that is currently all I have. Does anybody else have any further questions or comments at this time? Okay, and I just want to remind you, you know, I'm here to answer your questions. If you have concerns, if you're struggling with any of it when you, you know, start the process of, you know, whether it be the leadership succession plan or getting the finance committee, please don't hesitate to call or email. This is what ANFP staff is here for. And just a quick couple of reminders. We have ACE registration early bird deadline that ends May 9th, so just a couple weeks away. Hope to see many of you there in Vegas. And then yesterday we sent out our first reminder for the new volunteer year in terms of rebate requirements. Chapter officers do need to be entered into the chapter portal by June 1st. Regardless if it's a 2-year term, if they're not changing, if it's the same person serving in the role, they have to be entered in each year. And again, that needs to be done by June 1st via the chapter portal. All right, well, mark your calendars for next month, Tuesday, May 23rd. We're going to be discussing social media and content development. Thank you again all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon. And again, don't hesitate to call me if you have any questions. Thank you.